they don't operate any charter schools. They're not going to make any money from any more charter schools being opened up. Their interest is in the education for students. The other side of that argument, the teachers' unions, the schools associations, the education establishment, they're trying to preserve what they have. Why is that not deemed a special interest when we're talking about this argument? And yet it never is. The special interest is identified as the people who are acting for students' interests and have, unless it's a charter management company, which is very rarely engaging in these kind of fights anyway, they don't stand to have any business interest or any of this. They're doing it because they think it's good for students and they think it's good for families. They get deemed to be the special interest. I know those weren't your words. And the folks who are trying to preserve what they have and talk about schools and systems and buildings and adult problems and just about anything other than kids and students, they get a pass on that. And I think we shouldn't let that happen anymore. John, you look like you were about to raise your hand.
Yes. Going back to what you were saying, I think it's a messaging thing. And so your Georgia School Boards Associations and all, I think going back to what you were just saying, it's a messaging thing. The Georgia School Boards Association and a handful of other bodies are all able to get together and create a unified message that can go out. What mechanism or what networks, whatever else, are there on the opposite side to try and create sort of a unified message? Because if the vast majority of the public is in support of this, then it's really a messaging thing to the legislators as much as anything else.
Yeah, and that's where I'll just have to stop at what I said in response. I'll try to get on the other side of here, see if that helps. In response to Monica's question, which is that there's some new work that's going to be done on that by some folks who engage in that kind of stuff, but it's not something I can really talk about tonight. And it's not us specifically, so it's not my place to do it anyway. But yes.
Thank you. My name is Julie Mock. I live in Oconee County. I moved here from Tennessee last year, and I could probably take up an hour, but I won't. But just to let you know, I have 4 kids. My oldest is 22. She is going to medical school. Next year, I have twins that are 17 and sophomores in high school who have special needs, and I have a 12-year-old in 6th grade who has a 504. This program is urgently needed. I will help in any way that I can. You give me a list of names, I will drive to the representatives myself personally and explain to them my personal experiences. We have been in 3 different states, 4 different school districts, and a charter school. I have 17-year-olds who are in Algebra 2 and can't add and subtract if they're on the same page. The problems are on the same page. It is desperately needed, especially for children who have special needs, because their needs are not being met. Oh my goodness, my 6th grader was handed a Google Chromebook. We are completely cut out of the education process now as parents. We do not have access to textbooks. They are all online. I have no idea what she is learning unless I have all of the passwords and resources and links to those school books. I have no idea what she's learning. And IXL recently, which is something that's used universally, there was something in there about trying to persuade children against the Electoral College. We don't see those things as parents anymore. We don't get worksheets home in the backpack. I need to know what my kids are learning. I will help in any way I can. I'll give you my cards before we leave.
I do want to point out something as we talked about the politics of the legislature, that Governor Kemp and Lieutenant Governor Duncan both really pushed this really hard. And that shows how hard this political issue is, because when you have the governor and the lieutenant governor who are strongly endorsing something and you still can't get it. So it does need, we pointed out, more grassroots support, more people to tell their senators and representatives that they support it.
I have 2 children who are both special needs students, like yours, but we were caught in a very odd crux in that we have students who have physical disabilities but are highly intellectual. And we had spent 35 years that I call in purgatory in North Fulton County, so that our kids could go to school there because we thought those were the best schools and had the most opportunities for them. We were very fortunate to get our son into a charter school there, where he did very well. But we found that public schools want to stick kids in one of two categories. And so you couldn't be both a special needs student and a gifted student. And so finally we moved to a rural community with a wonderful school. Their schools are so good, kids pay tuition to go to school there from other counties. And recently I was teaching in Morocco, and my daughter went with me, and she was able to bring her Chromebook and do all of her work in Google Classroom from Africa. And at the same time share with the students in her class what she was learning. So I think rural schools as a category get a really bad reputation that is not due to all of them. But my concern about one thing Kyle said with the virtual academy. So one of my children spent 6 months in Scottish Rite and had to do the 9th grade and 10th grade at the same time. So she was able to do her regular classes and then do the virtual academy. But she was able to do that because we had high-speed internet. Yes. So many of our rural students have the capacity to do the work, and the virtual academy was actually created for them as the great equalizer to give access to those AP classes they don't have that allow them to get into a Tier 1 institution, but they don't have internet access to get to the virtual academy. And so I think if we're going to support this, they need to either be able to use some of this scholarship money to pay for internet if they can get it. If they can't get it, we've got to figure out how to get these kids on to high-speed internet, because eventually we're not going to have brick and mortar schools.
I turned our Chromebook in. You don't want our Chromebook.
Mike, do you want to say anything about the infrastructure piece?
Yeah, I mean, we passed Senate Bill 2 this year, which allows the electric membership corporations, which cover most of rural Georgia, to start offering broadband. They already have poles, they already have infrastructure, they already have existing customer relationships, there's access to federal funds, and so we agree as a legislature, and that's one where everybody agreed, the House, Senate, the governor, everybody was on the same page. And so yes, we believe that the future of education does mean that getting better internet access for everybody is going to be an important part of that piece.
And healthcare with telemedicine and commerce and all the rest. So.
Thank you, Kyle. My background is banking and hospitals. And I don't know if this is working. I can't use this. So my background is banking and hospitals, both heavily regulated entities. My general understanding of, and I'm on the fence on this issue, but you know, you're gonna open the market to private companies that are gonna find more efficient ways to do it. And I believe in the free market, and I think that's generally how it goes. But when you factor in regulation, it changes the dynamics of everything. I know it's changed it on the rural hospitals. I know in banking it's getting harder and harder to make a dollar. You know, when you do this program, how do you keep it from devolving into a heavily regulated industry? You know, and in a regulatory, right now I know you have accreditation to get in college, but is there going to be a government accreditation? Is there going to be a government agency that triples in size because of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. K through 12 education today is already, I would say, at least as heavily regulated as banks or hospitals. Ask any school principal, they'll tell you, they get 6% of their money and 50% of their paperwork from the federal government. Yeah. But an interesting thing about that is homeschooling, which comes with very few regulations, there are some, but very few, is proving that the regulation isn't needed. If you ask colleges today, and I work for a university, right? Colleges and universities have learned that homeschool students are great applicants. And it used to be a little harder for homeschool students to get into good colleges because there was sort of a bias against them. Now, if anything, there's a bias in their favor. People think they're actually likely to be better educated and more successful. So I think that's showing that it's not more education we need, but just more choice. We need people to be able to choose the education that fits their kid. I mean, I'll tell you, my child, I have one child, my daughter went to private school. She went to private school from pre-kindergarten all the way through 18th grade. And for a variety of reasons to some of those schools, because there were 3 schools involved. But when other parents talk to me about their kids, there are plenty of parents I've talked to that I've recommended private school for, and there are plenty of parents I've talked to that I've recommended public schools for, regular or charter. It depends on the kid. There is not, private schools are not better than public schools for every kid. They're better than public schools for some kids. Public schools are better than private schools for some kids. A lot of people maybe don't realize, there are tons of families in the state of Georgia that have one kid that goes to private school and one kid that goes to public school, or 2 and 1 or whatever, that's split. Why? Because those parents know their kids well enough to know which one will do best where. We don't need regulation, we just need to give parents the opportunity to make those decisions.
Thank you. My primary concern with this program is the potential decrease in the overall quality of public schooling. This is a program that primarily parents who are more involved in their child's education are going to take advantage of. In my opinion, that's just a fact. You might argue that. But as a result of that, typically students with parents who are more involved are going to get better grades. They're going to be better students overall. I imagine you can find a correlation between those two things. So wouldn't this result in better students being pulled out of public schools, eventually, and leading to just an overall decrease in the quality of public schooling, which could be dangerous?
I'll make a quick comment that the literature shows that's not the case.
Which part?
When the students that remain in the public schools, the vast majority of studies show that they are at least no worse off than they were before, and oftentimes you see improvement for them. And I think the best explanation probably for that is the additional money being left over on a per pupil basis. If you believe that money is one of the most important inputs into the education system, and I'm not necessarily arguing that. And obviously above a certain point, yes, but after a certain point, it's not really clear that that's true. But if you believe that's true, and if you read the work of Professor Dorfman, that they're going to have more money left over on a per pupil basis, there's going to be more resources to help those students who arguably are in the most need of it because they're in perhaps a suboptimal situation and their families have not elected to take some sort of choice. So I know you wanted to say something too.
Also, I'd like to point out that it's funny, one of the things we've gotten better at over the last 20 or 30 years is figuring out how to collect data and evaluate performance. And I'll tell you a non-school related story and then get to the school related story. The first time economists and healthcare administrators tried to determine which hospitals were doing the best jobs and which ones were the bad hospitals, the best hospitals in this country were deemed the worst hospitals because they had the highest death rates. Do you know why? Because the really sick people got sent there, right? So we have learned, I think, in the last 20 or 30 years not to evaluate schools, for example, on their average student test score. In fact, now what we can do is link the test scores of specific students and follow them through the years. So even if we took the best scoring students out of a school, the correct way to evaluate that school is not say, well, your average test score went down. It's how much better are the test scores of your kids this year than those same kids were last year. That's also the correct way to evaluate teachers. It's not the teacher's fault if you give her a bunch of bad students one year, right? Or you give them a bunch of kids that had a bad teacher last year. The question is, did they get their students doing better than they were before? So if we evaluate schools correctly, we can make sure that the problem you're talking about doesn't happen.
One other quick thing is that argument's been using as charter very much too, while the parents are more involved and take their kids out and cherry pick and all that kind of stuff. But all these other arguments, they said the hold as well, but the teachers are still there, and the same teachers are hopefully there in the school, and are going to hopefully be able to teach these kids just the same as they were before. But what you see, and we saw this in the city of Atlanta, has some successful charter schools, and they're demonstrating that sort of the defeatist attitude, well, these kids are too hard to educate, they don't have parental support, and so therefore they're not going to get a good education. But voila, then they go over to this other school and show that they can do better. That makes the original school perk up a little bit and say, you know what? It's just benefits of competition. And they're like, you know what? I don't like the fact that these 50 kids left. I'm going to step up my game, and we're going to, get some of the rust out and try to do new things in order to get these kids better educated.
And in Arizona, which has been a leader in this, you see public schools advertising about the advantages that they have to families. They are marketing to families because they're competing, and it is making them improve, like you're saying, and offer a better education both to the students who are still there and any who might consider going there. So I do think competition can work. You look like you might have a follow-up question, or?
I just have a concern that, yeah, sure, I'll take it.
As the better students start to drift away as a result, that, the better teachers will follow. As more students go to private schools, the teachers will follow. And then as the quality of students decrease, as a result, the quality of teachers will decrease. And it's just kind of like a...
This program is designed to let any student, not just the better students.
Right. And you guys gave a great argument for that earlier. But I think that regardless of, the resources that are provided for this to help everyone have an equal opportunity on it, at the end of the day, the parents that are more involved in their students' education are going to be the ones that take advantage of this program. So.
Good, so punish them? I don't understand that theory.
Yeah, because not everyone should benefit, no one should benefit.
Right. Well, I'm not arguing. I'm not trying to argue pro or against the whole policy right now. I'm just pointing out that it could be, potentially really hurtful for public schooling and the overall quality of that as a whole.
Yeah, let me address that a little bit. Yeah. An interesting thing is that actually, in general, the best students aren't the ones that leave public schools. There is a very good private school, I guess about 7-8 miles from where we're sitting, Athens Academy, that sends kids to top colleges every year. There are 2 public high schools in Athens, Clark County, Clark Central and Cedar Shoals. They're both huge, and if you looked at the test scores, Athens Academy would look like they are crushing them. However, there are more kids going to Ivy League colleges every year from the public schools than from the top private school. Because there are a whole bunch of really smart kids here, and the really smart kids do great in every school.
That's right.
A lot of times, the ones that are getting moved from the public to the private school, you're exactly right, they have involved parents, but they're the B+ students. They're not struggling enough for the public schools to give them extra attention, and they're not quite in the gifted programs either. So a lot of times, that's actually who's getting drained off into the private schools. It's not the super genius kids. Those kids succeed everywhere, and their parents can pretty much just sit back, relax, and let everything take care of itself.
We have time for a couple more questions.
Professor, you're right. I have 2 kids, and I'm not going to take my kids out of public school that they're doing great at, If they're doing bad, yeah, I'll take them out, So, I don't know how old you are, but, my kids are 12 and 14, so I wouldn't take them out of school. They're doing awesome. If they're doing bad, maybe, So I'm just adding to, that.
Yeah, that's the argument I was looking for.
Yeah.
You also have to follow the money. If you know anything about teacher salaries, public school teachers make so much more than private school teachers. The best teachers who are making top salaries at public schools, not going anywhere.
Well, Faith, I'll argue that with you. I work with a lot of Forsyth, Hall, and Fulton County teachers, and I see a lot of the teachers are complaining that the class size is too big, and they're overwhelmed, and this $3,000 that they're getting, it's not a raise, it's restitution. They deserve it. Yeah.
We've got time for one more question. Anyone who hasn't asked one yet, any of our students who are here want to ask one? I want to give you all an opportunity. I know you're maybe a little more shy to raise your hand sometimes. Okay, we'll get her right over here. Last question.
On the funding for the ESAs, is this cumulative? In other words, from year to year, that account builds for those students? In other words, so in the lower years, the grammar school years, you're not using as much money as you get to the high school years. What happens? Is it like the 529 plan? It's got to be used for education purposes only? Can it be passed on to a sibling in the same family unit?
That varies from program to program and state to state. The general concept is that you could save a portion of the money, not all of it, that could roll over year to year and could eventually be used for college tuition. I don't think that, I'm not aware of any that allow you to roll it over and eventually use it for a sibling or anything like that. I think the premise is you're withdrawing from the public schools. You're now responsible for your child's education, and this is the money to do it. So you're not gonna roll over a really high percentage of it.
Concession number 47 this year was to make sure that money in higher ed was spent in Georgia, either a Georgia public school or a accredited, the same schools that would accept a Hope private school grant. So we made sure that you weren't going to take a bunch of Georgia taxpayer money and go to Stanford with it or something, or MIT.
Jay Thomas, concluding remarks from you?
Well, I guess I should just say thank you, honestly. Really, I can't express enough gratitude to all these people who showed up, my friends, my fellow editors. Thank you guys. Thank you to the panel, and especially thank you to the Georgia Public Policy Foundation for partnering up with us and putting this on. Thank you for your questions, and I think that's all I got. I hope I didn't forget anybody.
You left out your dad. You're supposed to thank him for it.
My father was just my friend as well. What did you say?
Can we subscribe?
That's a great question. So yes, you can subscribe at our website, which is ArchCon UGA. Is that right? ArchConUGA.com. There's a subscribe button, and I think it works. It works. Yes, ArchConUGA.com.
And we'll mail the magazines to you.
Yes.
I'm a subscriber, and I need to renew.
Oh, right. Yes, you can.
I read it from cover.
You guys are shouting stuff at me. I can't hear you.
Nice little letters.
Right, and we'll send you a magazine every day.
I love it.
Well, you handled that question about your dad a lot better than I would have at your age, so your public speaking skills are in good shape. I just want to echo that. Thanks to the Arch Conservative for partnering with us on this. Thanks to everyone for showing up. We just couldn't be happier about the way this went and the folks that we had showing up and the numbers and everything. We will certainly be back. In the meantime, if you have not used your tickets, your drink tickets, I see we still have some beverages available. There may still be some food available. If there is, by all means eat it. On your way out, please pick up a copy of Professor Dorfman's study. Please take our literature about the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, a copy of the Arch Conservative magazine, and we will look forward to seeing you the next time we're here, and we're adjourned. Thanks.